Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope you're doing well. We are talking about how to identify accessibility issues of web content this morning. So thanks for joining us. We had about 30 registered, so we might have some folks join late. Let's see, make sure I can get to the chat. All right, so I'm Donna Murray. I am the Digital Accessibility Specialist at DPI. And this is one of a series of webinars that I started in June, but will continue even after July. So I will share the link at the end for the professional learning webpage to point you in that direction to look at a schedule for upcoming events, and then encourage you to continue looking at that because we'll be scheduling lots more webinars over the coming months and honestly over the coming years. So our session today is about how to use automated accessibility evaluation tools, how to recognize common errors, and then also to understand the importance of manual checks in addition to some of the automated checks that we can do with those automated tools. So just a few housekeeping things. If you've not joined one of our webinars before, please know this is definitely an informal presentation, and I encourage you to engage in whatever way works best for you. So if you have any questions at any time or any comments, please feel free to use the chat, raise your hand, unmute, interrupt me, whatever works best for you. But if you're not talking, please stay muted. There is captioning available in WebEx, so you should see a closed caption option in the bottom of your screen. And let me throw the link to the slide deck in the chat. There's also a shortcut link noted on the slide, on the first slide, go.ncdpi.gov/is it accessible. And then I put the direct link in the chat. So on this slide, I also have a link where you can make a copy of the slides. So feel free to do that. It'll ask you to, or allow you to make a forced copy. So feel free to do that if you'd like to take notes or if you'd like to repurpose this presentation back in your office at DPI or back in your PSU. What's mine is yours. Feel free to take it and use it however you'd like. And I will be posting this recording and the corresponding transcript hopefully later today, but if not today, then sometime this week. All right, so before we dive into actually talking about the automated tools and how to do some of those automated and manual checks, I just want to reference a new rule that the Department of Justice has published back in April, at the end of April. A new rule that aligns with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, which is specific to state and local government, was actually published in the Federal Register. So I'm going to put that link in the chat in case you want to pull that up and bookmark it for later. The rule itself is 320 pages long. So here's the short version. The rule is, again, for state and local governments, which is what Title II is in the ADA. And Title II states that we cannot discriminate against those with disabilities. We've got to make sure that our services, programs, and activities are accessible. And it's for state and local governments, but that does include our K-12 public school districts. It actually also includes community colleges and our public universities. But through the lens of like K-12 education, do know that it speaks to our K-12 PSUs. And essentially, the short of it is that it's providing some clarity. This rule provides some clarity about what our responsibilities are for ADA Title II, and really clarifies about specifically making content accessible that is digital. So digital content, including web content and mobile applications. And essentially, the rule says there's never been a standard in place within ADA, but now this rule identifies a kind of setting the bar, sets a standard. Excuse me. And so the standard that has been set is a certain level of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And so the standard is level 2.1 double A. Excuse me, y'all, my allergies are kicking this morning. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 has actually been out for some time now. But if I scroll down, you will see that there are lots of different standards that have to be met. So for example, making sure that we have alt text for images. So a textual description of images, that falls in with this 1.1.1 standard. Making sure that we have captions available when we have live events like this webinar is part of 1.2.4. So all of these stand for, some sort of technical standard to ensure that our content, our digital content, is accessible. So this new rule is saying that we now have this bar that we have to meet. And the bar that has to be met is the compliance start date for meeting the standard is within 2 to 3 years. It depends on the size of your city or county based on population data. So I actually have another webinar where we do a deep dive into the rule, but just wanted to mention it as part of our conversation today about checking for accessibility, because it's certainly going to be the standard that we need to meet when we're looking at doing some automated and manual testing. We need to be looking at, does it meet standards that are outlined in the WCAG 2.1 AA. So I have a link here that also, hang on, let me go back and throw this WCAG link in the chat too. Of course, these are all linked in the slide deck, but I'll try to remember to throw the direct links in the chat too in case you want to pull those up and bookmark them. This is a related website that talks about how do you ensure that, that you are meeting that standard. And so it has a wealth of information on what those standards are, what it means, and also gives you some examples of how to meet that standard and what would kind of qualify as a failure to meet that standard. So it's a lot of information, but certainly allows you to have even the quick reference, I would say, is a deep dive into those WCAG standards that align with that rule. So I don't know if you noted, let me pull that tab back up. In the WCAG standards, you may notice that there's each section of the standards is then broken down into kind of smaller sections and then even the substandards within those. But if I look at just the bolded sections here, there's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And that is really the framework that we're going to be keeping in mind as we're looking to ensure our content's accessible. We want to make sure that content can be presented in multiple ways, kind of like that alt text that I was talking about, that there's different ways to navigate that information. So making sure that our content is keyboard accessible, for example. Making sure that the content, that the whole experience, that the usability of our web content is understandable. So it's easy to, it's intuitive. I understand how to get around the content, but I also the content is even written in such a way, the text is even written in such a way that it's what we call plain language. It's easy to understand. And then also that it's robust. So this ensures, this is where we're talking today. How do we make sure that the content is accessible, that we've checked it, and also that it's accessible in a way that assistive technologies can access that content, and our assistive technology users can understand and navigate our content. So the POUR framework, again, is kind of really how our standards are divided for our WCAG 2.1, but it's also helpful to kind of layer this framework into our discussion about evaluation, because these are the types of things we want our users to be able to do. And so it's a good framework for our discussion. And so before we jump into some of those tools and look at some example websites that we can test with those tools, just want to give you an idea of kind of the current landscape of website accessibility. So the Web A Million project is put together by this organization. Again, I'll throw the direct link in the chat. And they talk in here about how they determine the top 1 million websites. Every year they, let's see, here's the methodology. So if you want to learn more about how they pick the top 1 million websites, essentially they take the top most visited websites and do a quick automated evaluation, because an intensive evaluation would take quite some time for the 1 million websites. So they just do a quick automated evaluation using a tool called Wave. And that's a tool that we're going to demo today and give you a chance to try out. And the results of that review, the last one they did was in February of 2024. They usually do it sometime late winter, early spring. Shows that in those top 1 million websites, there's an average of almost 60 errors per page. So this is not just an issue that we're finding on obscure web pages somewhere. It's pretty consistent across the board that our web pages specifically have lots of accessibility issues. And so, and it's also interesting to note that the automated tools can have been noted to find as little as 10 to 20% of the errors on a page. So there's a lot of accessibility issues that users are coming up against when they go to content. And this study kind of checks the pulse, if you will, of the current landscape each year. So this was a quick snapshot of the current landscape that I wanted to share with you before we jump in today. And these are the most common WCAG failures. So those standards that we were talking about in the 1 million websites and all of the failures that were found, almost 80% of those pages had low contrast text. So this is an example of one of the things that we can check with automated tools, but also requires the manual checking. So we'll talk about how to do that and essentially what these, what it means when we are looking at low contrast text. The other things are, as you can see, over half of the web pages had missing alternative text. They also, you can see about half were missing form labels. So think about, like, if I have a form where you can type in first name, last name, date of birth, whatever, even if it's a search bar, it was missing a label so that users can understand exactly what they're supposed to be putting in that form label, in that form field. And then other things like empty links and empty buttons. Typically, this means that someone is using an image and has not put the appropriate alternative text so that someone will know that that image is representing a link or representing a button. And then you'll see that another top common failure is that the document is missing language. So it's important when, especially for like a screen reader, it's important for a screen reader to recognize that a page is in the language of English, for example, so that it will pronounce things accurately. If I'm using a translation tool, that it's going to translate appropriately. So it needs to know, again, what the language of the text is on that page. So these are the most common WCAG failures, and these are things that we're going to talk about evaluating with those automated tools, and then, of course, manually. So our evaluation for accessibility really needs to be threefold. Automated testing can help so much and definitely give us a first layer of review. Excuse me. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these automated tools can only catch as little as 10 to 20% of the errors. So it's really important that we understand how to do some manual testing so that we can continue that evaluation manually. And then it's also important that we really start considering how can we have some users to do some testing themselves, because that firsthand user experience is really going to help us identify some potential accessibility errors that we wouldn't find doing some manual testing or some automated testing. And so this is an example, and I just realized I don't know if I turned on my settings to ensure that audio plays on this video. So if you just let me know in the chat or unmute, please, if you can't hear this. But this is an example of a screen reader user and what it's like when he is using a keyboard and a screen reader to navigate a page. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, y'all. I see your messages now. So essentially, what this user is demonstrating is that, I'm going to keep it playing. I can't hear the audio, but I can talk over it. So essentially what he's demonstrating here is how he's using his keyboard to navigate this page. So you can see that he is clicking some different keys on the keyboard, and then there's a pop-up that's actually providing the text. This is what he's hearing from his screen reader audio. So heading level 1, make videos accessible. He's talking about how, he said we could be here all day if I didn't have the capability to navigate the entire page by using my keyboard. So he's able to jump from one heading to the next by using his keyboard rather than having to hear the whole page read aloud just to get to the part that he wants, that he wants or needs to get to. So let me close some of my tabs here. So essentially he's demonstrating how a screen reader uses some of those like the heading structure to be able to navigate. So that's an example of how a screen reader, uses some of the coding, the features that are built in, or that we're building within our digital content to ensure that they can access the content that they need as they need it. So these are some of the easy checks that we can do to ensure that folks like him, screen reader users, can navigate appropriately. And so I have a link here to a web page that really gives a quick overview of each of some of these common checks. We are also going to be looking at some of these common checks in the next couple of websites that we look at. So things like, how do we look to see if images have alternative text? Are we checking to make sure that the heading structure in a document includes heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 as appropriate? Are we checking the color contrast to make sure that the difference between the text color and the background color, it has enough of a contrast that it's easily readable? So these are some of what we are calling these easy checks. Some of these can be done with some automated tools, and some of them will require us to do some manual checking. So we'll talk about that. Now, it's important to note that in our 45 minutes together today, we're not going to talk about how to fix these issues. Today's content is really about how can we find accessibility errors. So I do have some other webinars where we do a deeper dive into some of the common errors, the accessibility errors, and how to ensure that we are addressing those proactively. And then even some deeper dive content, like we've got an upcoming session where we'll talk about how to ensure that our video and audio is accessible, things like that. But today is that lens of how do I check it? How do I check to see what's accessible and what isn't? So these are some of those easy checks. And again, we're going to talk about quite a few of these in the coming web pages that we're going to look at as we use some of those automated evaluation tools. One of the things that I mentioned was page title, or excuse me, language of page. And then sometimes also there's a place where we can put the page title. And I just wanted to give a demonstration of that. So this is a screenshot from a common web provider that a lot of our districts use for their website called Final Site. And so in the page settings is where I would set the page name, which would be the page title. And then here you can see the page language. And most likely our website providers have this set to an automated default of English, but you can see in this case, it looks like I could override that and change that to a custom language. So just wanted to give you an example of where that lives, because oftentimes a lot of these things are built right into the content of the page itself, and you may not be familiar with where you set the page language. Typically, it's somewhere in the page settings of a website. So let's talk about some of those evaluation tools. Now, these all are tools that I have used. Some of them are like extensions. Some of them are bookmarklets. So if you can see my bookmarks bar at the top, you'll see I have this Andy tool and the Sally tool. The Wave evaluation tool is actually a tool that you can use right within the browser, but I also have added the extension. So you might see this little W up here beside my address bar. That's my Wave tool. And then there are some tools like Grackle Docs that are built. It's an add-on that I've added to my Google Docs so that I can check the accessibility of my Google presentations, my Google documents. And then there are some accessibility checkers that are built right into some of the tools we use. So for example, Microsoft has an accessibility checker that is built right into Microsoft products like Word or PowerPoint. And then Canvas is another example of a tool that has an accessibility checker built right in. So I've linked to information about both of those. So we're going to demo a few of these tools and give you an idea of what you'll get when you do these evaluations and how to interpret that information. So here's an example. So I have a demo doc here. This is an accessibility document that I have used within some of my previous trainings, where I've got a Google Doc that has accessibility issues in it. And so I'm going to do a accessibility check on this and show you a couple examples of how the results of those accessibility checks, what that looks like. Let's see. And I see we've got some issues with distortions on the screen and slides. Let me see. I've not had that issue before in any of my webinars, so I'm trying to think of how to troubleshoot that. Is it just jumping around the screen? Eric said it's not too bad. Yeah, but I hate that. That's okay. All right, well, I apologize. I don't know what the issues might be, but if there's Tricia, mostly in the colors. Interesting. Well, that's definitely not making it very accessible, is it? I apologize. I don't know. Let me try one thing. Let me stop sharing and then try to share again and see if maybe that helps. Are you still seeing issues, or that's better? Eric says, okay. Well, no, it's not better. Well, no, yes. Tricia, you got to clarify. I'm just picking on you. Please, it's better now. Okay. All right. Well, please interrupt or continue adding to the chat if you see that there's, if it gets worse again. So the accessibility demo doc again here is a document that I've used that has accessibility issues in it. So I'm going to go to the extension that I have called Grackle Docs. I actually have, okay. Sorry, Tricia. Thank you for clarifying. She does not see the distortions anymore. Thank you. So in this document, I have, I'm using the extension for Grackle Docs, and all I did was go to launch. I'm using the free version, and you can see it's doing some checks here. So it's telling me that I have an image on the screen that does not have alternative text. I can see that it's telling me that it appears that I have some headings. It says paragraphs that look like headings. and you can see that I have some heading, looks like headings here, but when I go up to the styles, you notice that I actually just have it set to normal text instead of actually using the heading structure that's built in. So it's telling me this looks like a heading, but the coding is not, not labeling it as a heading. So you can see that Grapple Docs is pointing out some of those issues. It's telling me that I have a table down here that does not have the header row. Oh, sorry, trying to hover over it, pinned. And essentially that helps a screen reader note that this is the header and that it should reference and let me know what this cell is related to grade 4 on Monday, so that I know that this tells me the number of absences on Monday for 4th grade is 2. If I'm using a screen reader, it's important that I know that that first row is a header row. So you can see that it's letting me know some errors, and also what it's kind of denoting is some warnings or some things that I might need to manually check. Excuse me. And so Grapple Docs is an example of one of those automated tools. It's interesting to note that Google does not have a native accessibility checker. So Microsoft, for example, does have a native accessibility checker. Google does not. So Grackle Docs is a tool that I can use to help me identify some of those accessibility issues automated. And so these are some screenshots. These are things that I just noted for you when we were looking at it in real time, that there was an issue with tables. There was an issue with with alternative text for images, that I did not use headings appropriately, that my color contrast was not meeting the minimum ratio, and that my links were not informative. So let me go back and tell you what that means. If you're not familiar with links, that's not my link. Where's my link? Here we go. So descriptive links means that instead of click here, I should be putting some text and linking the text that would kind of stand alone. So instead of linking click here, I might want to highlight and link learn more about digital accessibility and make that the hyperlink, so that someone who is visually looking at that or using a screen reader and comes to this link is going to know, kind of an overview of what's going to happen when they click that link. What's it going to lead them to? It's going to give me more information about digital accessibility. Click here is pretty non-descriptive. And so it even recognizes that as an accessibility issue. Now, that same document as a Word document, so all of the same, oh, of course, I've been signed out. Oh, tech. All right. So the same information I have in a Word document, and when I use the embedded Word document Microsoft checker, these are the results that it gives me. So you can actually in a Microsoft document go to review and click on the accessibility checker, and these are the results that show in the right-hand side pane. And it shows me that I have a couple errors. I'm missing alt text, I'm missing a table header, and it shows me one warning. It's saying there's some hard to read text contrast. So notice that it only pointed out 3 issues, when the same document in Google Docs, you can see that it was more robust in finding some accessibility issues. So this is just to point out that these automated tools are not all the same. They're not going to all necessarily find the same errors. And again, it's important to note that sometimes it's not going to find some errors that would require some human review. And so we'll take a look at an example of that in a few minutes, where something would pass the automated checker, but actually still has some accessibility issues in it. So not all automated tools are alike is the short story here. And that's an example with that demo document. Now let's look at a test page. So this is a page actually that DIT created for sessions such as this. So I put the direct link in the chat in case you'd like to take a look at it. They created this Igor and Duck website. Uh, I assume this is someone's personal cat. And they built this web page that actually has a lot of accessibility errors in it. So one of the things you might note is that, like, for example, this flashing hay, that bright pink color might be a contrast issue. We've got some images here that may maybe lacking some alt text. But if you're like me, just at first glance, I look across this and I think, well, this, at first glance, I don't see a lot of accessibility issues. So these are this is an instance where an automated tool can help you find some of those things that maybe at first glance don't stick out like a sore thumb as an accessibility issue. I know that this link right here that says here, I know, because I know some accessibility strategies, that that's not a descriptive link. But without doing some deeper dive, I may not recognize that might be missing some alt text on images, or that this table is lacking in a header row or a column header. So tools like these accessibility checkers, like the Wave tool, can be helpful for that. So I'm going to click on the Wave tool, and you'll see that in this instance, it's showing me 0 errors. It's also showing me that I don't have any contrast errors. Now, it does have some alerts. So if I click on details, I can see that some of the alerts show that there's a skipped heading level. So there's not a heading, there's a heading 1, but there's not a heading 2, and then it jumps to heading 3. So it's saying, you might want to check that because it appears like there's a missing heading level and that needs to be corrected. It's even noting that this appears to be, this text is bolder and in a different color and larger, so it might be a possible heading. So you might want to manually check that. It's also noting things like this appears to be a list, but we didn't use like the numbered list or the bulleted list option. So it's not actually coded correctly in the HTML, but it recognized that I used a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. So it's possible that that might be a list and that I might need to review that. So you see that it's finding some things that I need to review in this wave evaluation tool, but it didn't give me any errors. Now, if I look at comparing that wave evaluation to another tool, this Axe tool, which I actually, let me turn off wave on this one. The Axe tool is actually something that is another accessibility tool that I use, and I actually right click and go to inspect, and this is where that Axe development tool lives. And so I can come in here and do a full page scan. I'm just using the free version here. And you'll see that it found 3 accessibility issues, and those are listed down here. So it's also finding that that heading level was skipped. It's also finding some color contrast issues. Remember that our wave tool didn't find that. And it's also letting me know that that all page content should be contained by landmark. So essentially, it's saying that that there's not some key information in the structure of the web page so that screen readers can find, can navigate that easily. So there's issues here. 2 of them are one is noted as serious, 2 are noted as moderate. And when I compare that again to the Wave tool that found 0 errors, again, you can see that there's some differences in how these tools evaluate. Essentially, these tools are just reading the code. They can't bring human context to this review. And so it's important, as we're looking at the next example, to consider how human context really needs to play a part in this. So even though this image, for example, the alt text, let's see if I can show it to you. I was trying to be able to show you the whole thing. Da, 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 da. to edit. There we go. So in this example, this image, there's the alt is blank. The alt tag is blank. And that means that there's no descriptive text that is noted for this image. And I think we can make a case that since this whole web page is about a cat, that maybe we need to include some alt text about this image, especially since this image has text on it. So if I didn't have that information, I might be missing some critical information. On this page, since it's about a cat, someone can make a case that this image needs to have a textual description, which might be, Igor, orange cat with green eyes sitting on a blue chair at the beach, and the text reads chilling at the beach. So some of those accessibility checkers aren't going to be able to check because they're missing that human context. So it's important to note that accessibility tools like the Wave tool or some of these other tools, the Sally Bookmarklet, the Andy accessibility tool, even Grackle Docs, even some of these built-in accessibility checkers aren't going to catch everything. So let's take a look at this website. This is a website called Accessible University, and it's, again, created specifically for trainings like this. So I put the direct link in the chat in case you want to take a look at it yourself. Excuse me, I didn't mean to click that. But notice in the top right-hand corner, there's a before and an after link. So this is the before with lots of accessibility issues built in. And then I can click on after to see how those accessibility issues have been fixed. Now, at first glance, you may look at the before and say, oh my goodness, I don't really see a lot of accessibility issues. Maybe you do if you notice that let's click here, or maybe you notice that when you look at I don't know, maybe the table, maybe you recognize that there might be an accessibility issue here because maybe the table isn't labeled accurately. But at first glance, it might look quite accessible. Let's do a wave evaluation check on this one. Look at this, 23 errors, lots of contrast errors, and even some alerts. Let's go into the details and you'll see it's letting me know that there are 4 images on this page that are missing alternative text. You'll see that there are some missing form labels. It's missing that language, like we talked about, that every page needs to have a language set. It's also pointing out lots of contrast, low contrast errors. Looks like they're using, for these links here, they're using a gray that's just too light on that white background. It also is noting some suspicious alternative text, and basically it's the automated tool is looking for alt text that includes words like graphic or image or something that makes it likely to be ineffective alt text. So these alerts would require some human context review. Excuse me. So these alerts are things that, again, you might need. It's just saying you might want to take a look at this because we are noting that this might be an accessibility issue. So the Wave tool found quite a bit of stuff. Now, if I turn off the Wave tool and go back to the web page, you'll notice that when I click on the after, some of the things that have changed. So for example, in the before, this button says go, but it's not really labeled in such a way that helps me understand that this is a search box. In the after, that button now reads search. In the before, when we were looking at some of these links that were low contrast, in the after, now that has been fixed and the contrast is sufficient. In the before, when I clicked on name, nothing's happening, which actually tells me that the coding in the background is not connecting this label with this form field. When I click on the after and I click on name, notice that it automatically prompts me, it's automatically putting my cursor in the related field. And you see I have autocomplete pop it up ready to put my name and address in. So there's lots of accessibility issues here. And in fact, the website has a link on it that lists all of the accessibility issues that are included on this webpage. So I encourage you, this is a great website to do some additional practice where you can kind of try out some of your accessibility checkers, like the Andy tool that I was mentioning. It actually pulls together accessibility issues by kind of content area up here. So I can look at images, tables, I can even look at color contrast, and it lists for me what those issues are. That tool is actually a tool that's used by federal government agencies to do some accessibility testing. That's the recommended tool for them. The other tool, Sally, when I click that bookmarklet, it pops up down here and shows me some of the errors. And of course, you can see it's highlighting them. And when I hover over them, it's letting me know what the issues are. It's even labeling where the headings are. So that automated tool is called Sally. I encourage you to try some of those. This is just a great tool to try that because we recognize, because we know that this page has accessibility issues, and I appreciate that it has a before and after, so you can kind of test out those tools on a web page that's, broken and one that's not. Oh, sorry. So let's take a look at this example. This is actually an image that has text on it. So I'm going to show you this link. I'll put the link in the chat to you. This is actually completely inaccessible. And so this is demonstrating why accessibility testing, automated accessibility testing isn't enough. Because watch what happens when I click on the wave tool. No errors, no contrast errors, no alerts. So at first glance, it seems like everything is great. But when I click on the button, you'll see it tells me exactly what's broken about it. It looks like text, but it's actually an image. And if I don't have alt text on this image, which it doesn't have, then someone's not going to recognize, someone who's, for example, a screen reader user is not going to recognize that there's text on this button that reads, click here to learn why this is completely inaccessible. So that's one of the issues. Another issue is that I can't click on it if I'm using just a keyboard to navigate. So if I just tab through this page, I never land on the button, never. So this button is completely inaccessible for someone who uses a keyboard. And the colors don't have enough contrast. And since it's an image, I can't easily fix that because the text and the background color are part of the image, so it's not easily fixable. These are all reasons why this button is completely inaccessible. So again, we can't rely on automated testing enough. And I appreciate it. I found this quote by someone that I really appreciated because it really tells the story, I think, of how automated evaluation tools can be extremely helpful. I mean, we're finding lots of errors that we may not find quickly doing some manual testing. So they can be helpful, but it can also, if you're not familiar with how evaluation tools like this don't catch everything, it can almost result in a sense of complacency. Because when I did this button and did the wave tool, there were no errors. So all must be good, right? But we looked at it and found out there were accessibility errors. So don't let these tools give you a sense of complacency. It's important to do some manual testing. But of course, that it can be a missed opportunity. It's a great first check to see if there's some accessibility issues within your content. So I know we're coming up on our time here. I want to put this direct link in the chat. This is kind of your takeaway homework assignment. Is I encourage you to go to this web aim tool, the wave tool. You don't even have to download the extension. You can check a web page right here. So I did in one of my sessions, I checked the Olympic trials web page. And you can come in here and check it right within the browser. And you'll see that it's loading the web page and also loading the check. And you can see, look how many alerts and errors and contrast errors there are on this Olympic trials web page. So I encourage you today, let that be your takeaway assignment, to test like your PSU homepage or your your favorite web page that you visit every day. check it with the wave tool and see what kind of accessibility errors, if any, are found. It is important for us to start encouraging, or not encouraging, it is important for us to start identifying ways that we can pull in users to help us evaluate our content. So for example, if you're totally redoing your PSU website, then I encourage you to ask some volunteers, especially volunteers who, have identified themselves as having a disability, to try out the web page and give you some feedback about accessibility. So this website kind of outlines some good ways to involve users, and also like a process for that. Like, what would you have them look at? What kind of questions would you ask them? And it's important to remember that just because maybe you pull in 3 people with disabilities to do some testing, that's just giving you 3 experiences. So don't generalize those experiences and say, well, they didn't find the issues, so all must be good. Certainly, continue, this needs to be an ongoing discussion. How can we pull in some users to help give us some feedback on the accessibility of our content? If you are familiar or not familiar, if you are part of the procurement process, so if you are out there searching for and finding some ed tech solutions that are going to be used within your PSU, or within your school, or within your office at DPI, there is some helpful information that we need to be asking from our vendors. And typically, kind of the standard is this accessibility template. So we call it a VPAT, but even when it's completed, we tend to call it a VPAT, when really, once it's completed, it's no longer the template, right? It's a report. So it might be called an ACR, but typically the common language is VPAT, whether it's the template itself or a completed template. And I've linked to the webpage where you can get a copy of this template. I encourage you to ask your ed tech vendors, as they are, replying to a RFP, or as you're reviewing their content to see if it's something that you want to purchase for your district, to encourage them to submit a VPAT. And so here's an example of a completed VPAT from Infinite Campus for the student and parent portal access. So I just found this online and wanted to share an example of a completed VPAT. Essentially what they're doing is looking at each of those WCAG standards and then letting you know if they conform to that standard. And the options are, do they support it? Do they partially support it? Do they not support it? Or is it not applicable? And then a good VPAT is going to include pretty detailed remarks and explanations. But certainly if it doesn't, that's a great next step, is to talk with those ed tech vendors to say, we need more information. What do you mean it's not applicable? Or what do you mean you only partially support this standard? So this is a good deep dive into whether or not, your ed tech procurements are accessible. There's even a report tool that you can use. This is just an example of one that I found that can kind of help you document as you're doing a review of a product. You can kind of go through each standard and make notes, and really end up with a nice, robust report of your findings when you're doing an accessibility check. So I know we went a few minutes over. I apologize for that. I do have some additional resources that I've linked into this slide deck, including some additional information about that rule, information that I have put onto my digital accessibility website, including additional information about the rule, how to create and procure accessible digital content, and a link to my professional learning page where I've got information about upcoming webinars, as well as where I will add today's webinar recording. But you'll also see, like, for example, I've done this session before back in June, and I have the link to that presentation recording as well. So I will continue to add the recordings and add to our calendar of upcoming events on that page. And if you're interested in learning more about accessibility, just some tips and tricks, I love this X account, Accessibility Awareness. It's actually a bot that was created by this user, Patrick Garvin, and it's just good, quick tips for accessibility. So I love this. I love this account. You can see just yesterday, it looks like you posted 3 or 4 tips. And so here's an example. Hyperlinked text should make sense when read out of context. So it's talking about how to avoid using click here. So just some good tips, and certainly things that I think would be easily digestible accessibility tips that you could share with others. So that's it. If you're interested in joining our community of practice, I'll throw that link into the chat. We're going to have a monthly meeting, but we're also going to have an opportunity for us to asynchronously collaborate as we grow together in learning about how to make our content accessible. And I tried to design this slide deck with accessibility in mind by doing some of these strategies. You see the POUR framework. And again, what's mine is yours. So feel free to repurpose the slide deck if that's helpful to you in any way. And I will stay on the call for a few more minutes in case you have any questions. I put the link to the slide deck again in the chat in case you joined us late. And thanks for joining. I hope you'll make time to join future webinars. And again, I'll stay on the call in case you have any questions. Have a great day. Hey, Lee. Absolutely. I'm happy to stay on the
Hey,
call. Let me.
it's down there. It's down there's Lee, but it's Bert. How are you?
Oh, I'm Bert. Hey, Bert. I know. I should know that. I see
No,
Jenkins
no,
now.
it's
Hey,
weird.
Bert.
It's weird. That's what happens when you use your middle name. I know
That's
you
right.
need to end the webinar, but could we jump over just on Teams and for you
Yeah,
and you to show me the Canvas accessibility tool? We're working on our hubs for our new standards. Um,
absolutely.
and
Yeah, I would
it'll
love
be
to do
really
that.
cool for us to jump on the front side of it and see what we need to do as we're making it rather than go back and fixing it.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Donna, I'm in
So,
charge of all that work for our whole office, so can I join
yes,
you?
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Let me jump over to Teams and then I'll call you. I'll add you both to it. I'll invite you both to
Sounds
it.
good.
How's that
All right,
work?
I'll leave.
Okay,
Thanks.
sounds good. All right.